Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2023. And specifically, I'd like to focus our attention, if I may, on this wonderful box set which was released by Criterion about a month or so back. This set is Pasolini 101, and it is in regards to certain films directed by the Italian filmmaker Pier Paolo Pasolini. And today, if you don't mind, I'd like to focus on one such film which is included in this wonderful set. And this is a film which is described as being from the year 1967, and it is directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini. And the name of the film is, and please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation of the Italian language, I hope you can forgive me, but the name of the film is Oedipo Re, or as it's known in English, Oedipus Rex. This is the work, another extraordinary work from the director Pier Paolo Pasolini, and this is described as being from the year 1967, and it is directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini. It is written for the screen by Pier Paolo Pasolini, based upon the play The Work by Sophocles, and it is also produced by Alfredo Bini, and the costume design Danilo Donati, edited by Nino Baragli, and the cinematography by Giuseppe Ruzzolini and others on this wonderful crew. And as far as the cast is concerned, the wonderful cast, we have people like Franco Citti and Silvana Mangano and Alida Valli and others. This is, again, the very compelling and wonderfully structured work. And please pardon me once again for my very poor pronunciation of the Italian language. I hope you can forgive me. But this is Oedipo Re, or as it's known in English, Oedipus Rex. And so a wonderfully and fascinatingly structured film in terms of its bookending, its treatment of modern day settings, modern day Italy, and the modern day Italy or Bologna setting on the one hand, but also what could be said to be comprising the bulk or the main part of its running time, which is sort of the ancient setting and complete and adorned with the play's sort of environments and entrapments, and also the kind of decor and decorations, that are part of a play which could be said to be a kind of classical approach, and a very classical yet rugged approach to the text, to the play, to the work, the Sophocles work, which is Oedipus Rex. And so if we were to try to delve into this a little bit further, we understand that this is a story about, say, the birth and the childhood and the growing up and the young adulthood of our main character, who is Oedipus, who is portrayed by Franco Citti. And it's a very interesting set of circumstances, shall we say, with regard to his birth and the circumstances and the situations in respect thereto. And we understand, too, that he has, say, conceptions or understandings of who he is and what his family background is, let's say. And that includes who he is in relation to what he perceives to be, based on, from his perspective, his relationship with the people that he understands to be his mother and father, or his family. And this also brings about aspects of ambition and fate, and also oracles and prophecy, which also guides young Oedipus towards what he tries in terms of his own self-exertion to be guiding his own fate along towards certain destinies. And those destinies, as I say, may, in the hands of Oedipus at the time of his, say, growing up and his young childhood or young adulthood, when we meet him during the first half of the film, this may to him seem to be his own self-doing. This may be the results and the product or the byproduct of his own, what he perceives to be his own efforts and his own will. And those situations lead to him meeting very key people. And perhaps one of the key relationships here is that with the Jocasta character, and this is portrayed by Silvana Mangano. And one can say that the relationship between Jocasta and Oedipus, again, Mangano character and the Chiti character, could be said to be one of the key relationships, if not the critical relationship of this film. Because again, through a certain set of circumstances involving a show of force, a show of physical and, say, a mental prowess, he is able to confront certain challenges, Oedipus does, confront certain challenges that are part of his story, his arc, leading again to further advancements or developments or evolutions in his own livelihood and state of being and his career, both professional and personal, leading to great wealth and great status and great stature and quite high-profile royalty stature, to say the least. But this is only the beginning, or this is only part of the tale, because, as I mentioned before, there are many aspects of Oedipus's own life and life journey which he might perceive to be the end result of his own self-determination and will and hard fought efforts from an internal standpoint. But perhaps the case might not be as simple as it might be so perceived. In other words, it might be more complex than meets the eye. And in that event, we might get into an involvement of concepts of fate and destiny. This idea of fate and destiny in the hands of Sophocles and adapted by Pasolini is again recognized as perhaps being inescapable, even when one doesn't recognize its existence at the time. When those realizations or epiphanies do hit our main characters, then we see whether or not our main characters are able to escape the ebbs and flows, if you will, of a type of inscrutable external destiny, or whether indeed there might be some room for self-determination and will on an individual level on the part of our main characters, Oedipus and Jocasta and others. So this forms part of, say, the crux of the issue. And I'm trying to be vague as possible here, again, for the benefit of those who perhaps haven't watched this film yet, or maybe are not familiar with the story of Oedipus, Oedipus Rex. And indeed, there might be people who have who might watch this film and might not necessarily be familiar with Oedipus Rex. However, it is, I think, a very famous story, and so a lot of the materials, and indeed perhaps a lot of the way in which the film is presented, in terms of the prologue and then the main part of the film, and indeed the epilogue or end part of the film, or indeed how the film is bookended, beginning and end, and then the bulk of the film being the middle. It might be set up in a way that presumes that one knows the story of Oedipus Rex, because there are indications or clues or nuances on the that are revealed almost immediately. That might be very suggestive of where the story is going to go in terms of its trajectory. So again, there might be some assumptions on the part of the filmmaker that the viewer might know the story of Oedipus Rex. And indeed, that through line is very evident in terms of, say, how dialogue is layered in, clues and nuances along the way. But there is also room to see this film, again, from a first-time perspective. The journey and the story, the livelihood of that of Oedipus in the context of Oedipus Rei, Oedipus Rex, and all that befalls, and everything that is set up and then potentially that is going to be destroyed and crumbled and disintegrated before our very eyes, or at least the potential anyway. And when certain fates intervene, and when certain revelations and realizations occur, what is the scope of such revelation and realization, and how will the characters react when this sorts of revelation or epiphany occurs, and whether there will be some kind of maybe accountability at the end of the day, both in terms of a moral or a divine intervention. Or, as I say, is there something to be said about the individual rugged spirit as capable and as say, as tough as it is, or perhaps as people would like to think it is. But at the end of the day, when one is confronted with some pretty hard truths, what will one do with that, and how will one maybe take into consideration one's own life trajectory based on the hard truths of the moment. So I'm trying to be as vague as possible here, again, for the sake of those who do not know the story of Oedipus Rex, but suffice to say, this could be said to be a very faithful type of adaptation with regard to Sophocles' work in the hands of Pasolini in the context of 1960s cinema. And we have a number of very fascinating things about this. So the performances are, as per usual, top-notch. Franco Citti and Silvana Mangano sort of heading the way, and with other supporting players performing their roles magnificently. And I really enjoy, for example, Chitti's performance here, because there's a type of earthiness and a ruggedness to his role. I mean, he's shouting, and it's very broad, and it has these broad physical brushstrokes, and he is really being very physical. There are a lot of physical scenes, and the physicality shows through quite spectacularly. And the shouting and the yelling, as though almost screaming from the very bowels of his soul, certain things, and that has a type of operatic spin to it. But what I also love too is that the grandiose gestures they never overshadow the groundedness of how this film was shot. I mean, we can feel the dust on the ground. We can feel the crumbling of the rock walls. We can feel the sort of echo, the people that are actually there as the scenes are playing themselves out, and the light as it shines through, or the shadows that are actually made on the walls, etc. So there is a type of a lived-in earthiness to the way this is shot, and so that could be said again to have maybe it's type of cinematic residue, if you will, of Pasolini's style and convictions, cinematic convictions, again, borrowing from a sense of Italian neorealism. But it's not to say that this film is oftentimes classified by critics as a product of Italian neorealism. On the contrary, there is at the same time, a very obvious and obviously laid in theatricality, and because of the very nature of the work, again, Sophocles and Oedipus Rex, and also by the very nature of it being a period piece, and it very much announces itself as a period piece in terms of the art and environment and decor for the bulk of the film. However, and it also reminds us too about the theatricality by virtue of its comparisons with modern day settings, as we see in sort of the bookmarked beginnings and ends of this film. So we have very constant reminders of the theatricality of the piece. But what's so interesting is that along the way, while we are reminded of the theatricality of the piece, sometimes we are allowed to forget, or we are given room by the filmmaker to, in a very magical way, forget the theatricality, and we are thrust into the scenarios. And I think that's done too by the fact that we are being confronted with very fundamental emotional and psychological situations involving, say, attraction, involving a type of sexual energy, involving how that's linked to ambition, a very almost violently driven ambition, and which is essentially the very core crux of drama, the collision between, say, two human beings and the stories of two human beings, and which will win out at the end of the day. I mean, that's at the very heart and soul of a work like Oedipus Rex, and no wonder it then has its very fundamental links with a type of Freudian analysis, which is also very much at the heart and soul of the Pasolini work, Oedipus Rex. After all, one of the key relationships in terms of the story of Oedipus is that between generations, the generation of the parents and the generations of the children, fathers and children, or fathers and sons, and mothers and sons. And indeed, these can be said to be among the most fundamentally important relationships, at least in the context of Pasolini's works. After all, we have seen thus far in his filmography, and again, I don't want to go into too much detail about those other films, but we have seen, again, in very general terms, the importance of, say, the mother-child relationship in a work like Mama Roma, in the Gospel according to Matthew, and indeed father-son or father-children relationships as well in the context of, well, a mother-child relationship also in Akatone, and also how this is also very much part of the proceedings in a film like Love Meetings, for example. Here, that relationship is also explored in a very direct and thought-provoking way, and it leads to certain, shall we say, configurations or certain variations on the theme that are either regarded as being a furtherance of the Pasolini handling of this particular theme or concern, or perhaps it could be seen as a type of a destruction or a very purposeful type of antagonistic way to destroy that which has been considered over the course of, say, these films throughout the early part of the 1960s in the hands of Pasolini's film body of work as a director. And so there is, I think, much room for that type of varied interpretive analysis in the context of this work, Oedipus Rex. And we have also, in the way in which modern day settings are used, again, the reminder about how the themes and concerns of the story Oedipus Rex might have their application in a type of modern day setting. And this also gives room for, maybe even in an oblique way, Pasolini's handling of the Italian socio-political context. And maybe how this film could be said to be in many ways almost like a counterpoint to a film like Mama Roma. If Mama Roma, or the main character there, has a type of a motherly aspect, which almost has the potential for a sense of salvation in the context of Italian's social political culture. Here is that same type of sentiment existing in Oedipus Rex, especially how one might see Pasolini applying those themes to the modern day settings. Is it a continuation of Mama Roma, or could it be said to be flying in the face of the themes and concerns as set up by Mama Roma, thus creating a wonderful counterpoint to that earlier work? And I think any interpretation is possible, and that's one of the great strengths of a work like Oedipus Rex, Pasolini's Oedipus Rex. There is a directness to the way in which it is an adaptation of the play, of the Sophocles work, but also there is room for growth and development and interpretation a la Pasolini that we have come to know throughout the course of his filmography, and this is no exception to that. This is the work which is Oedipus Rex. Oedipus Rex is presented here in the context of this multi-disc Blu-ray set by the Criterion Collection, again, Pasolini 101. It falls under disc number 6006, and that's where you have here the 006 as part of this Blu-ray menu. I have the disc already in the machine, and this is the Blu-ray menu for Oedipus Rex. And it is at 1.85 to 1, and the masters, or about the master, there's information again in the booklet and in other places, but the booklet on page 94 states about the master regarding Oedipus Rex, and I quote, "This 4K restoration was undertaken by the Cineteca di Bologna in association with Compass Film and Istituto Luce Cinecittà at l'Immagine Ritrovata from the 35mm original camera and sound negatives provided by Studio Cine." So this is, again, the 4K restoration. And this has been released on previous non-Criterion releases, and so which I've had the great fortune of being able to have in the past and rely upon in the past, and I still do. And so I'm very taken with this restoration as it's presented here for the in the context of the Criterion Collection Blu-ray. And what I like about it is I like how it has a preservation of because this is a film of varying tones. It has a type of outdoor red earth setting to it. On the one hand, that has a lot of sunlight shining, a lot of outdoor scenes, but it also relies on the almost the shadowed hues of say outdoor settings in modern day Italian society, as well as some very key moments that occur in very darkened and shadowed halls and interiors as well. And so all that seems to be preserved, and there is again a sort of a vivacious liveliness to the color palette, which I find preserved quite satisfactorily in how I watch this film again, the Criterion Collection Blu-ray. So, in my very non-technical, subjective way, I very much am taken with this, and I think it has just the right degree of, say, sort of digitally enhanced, say, grain and contour, which is not at all, at least to my eyes and my ears, it's not at all distracting. On the contrary, I think it was a very pleasant and very welcoming viewing experience. I watched it a number of times on this Criterion disc, and I'm happy to say that this will be my go-to way of watching this film going forward. So I'm very, very pleased with how this looks in the context of this Criterion box set. And then next, let us turn to the supplements. And so here again is the Blu-ray menu for disc number 6 for Oedipus Rex. And when I go to the supplements menu, we can see 3 supplements that emerge. And again, I apologize for the lack of focus here. My camera work is not good at all, so I apologize for my poor presentation skills. But it does have 3 supplements available in the supplements submenu of this disc 6. And then the first is Notes for a Film on India. And it is described here as saying, this documentary was shot on the occasion of Pasolini's trip to post-independence India to do research on a proposed film. It features his reflections on the country's economic and class-based hardships, as well as on its modernization and westernization. This is approximately 34 minutes. This is a really fascinating documentary. It also is a sort of Pasolini perspective one. We have seen examples in past discs included, for example, in this Pasolini 101 set, where we've had Pasolini go abroad and say provide his perspective on, say, the architecture and the modern day society, and his understanding of the history and literature of the place that he's visiting versus how he perceives modernity as applied to the current settings. And I think that is a great way to approach a viewing of this work, Notes for a Film on India. He describes it as being a film about a film on India. And so you see here his, or you hear his voice essentially trying to adjust to, or maybe seemingly try to adapt, in the sense maybe trying to adapt his notion of a potential story or maybe literary based ideas. Again, that could be the basis of maybe some kind of future film from him, and based on his understanding of the culture and literature and spiritual and religious aspects of India, while at the same time going to various parts and giving us shots, real life perspective in a manner of speaking, and interviews as well, and getting the perspective of people that he is able to interview. And one of the perspectives, or one of the topics that is talked about, is the notion of, say, the push and pull between, say, the preservation or the need to, or the urgency to want to, say, protect certain aspects of society and culture of India, while at the same time maybe acknowledging the so-called quote-unquote westernization, or the emergence of a type of emerging industrial-based economy. And so how does the population of India, again in the context of the voices that are interviewed on camera for purposes of this Pasolini work, how do people really feel about this? And I think there are some real frank and honest and quite wonderful and refreshing takes that are provided here and that are shared. And indeed, Pasolini himself either echoes or reacts to, or provides his take on. And this can be said also, again, to be in the context of the overall Pasolini perspective. Namely, he is always concerned, or he has always been concerned, it can be said, in the works that we've seen thus far, with this type of say, clash, if you will, between a type of a historical past, or the beauty and the ways of the historical past as expressed in art, literature, religion, and architecture, etc., while at the same time acknowledging or recognizing or perhaps lamenting certain aspects of the growing economy in the context of type of currency and modernity, and whether that can be complementary to a type of importance of society and culture, or whether there is no room for this type of complementary relationship, and it has they are not mutually exclusive of each other, or perhaps they cannot be mutually coexisting. Let me put it that way. So this type of thesis, or this type of, say, cultural analytical approach from Pasolini, who himself acknowledges to be an outsider, but an outsider with a keen interest. And then also keen interest in what people have to say, and what the people that he is interviewing or is able to interview have to say about various aspects of this. And again, this is to do with economy, religion, and sort of the emergence of sort of industrial-based, say, economy versus how this affects perspectives on society and religion and culture writ large. So this is another wonderful treatise. It's also another loving portrait. And one thing we do know too about Pasolini is that he always tends to try to use his camera in a way that is very respectful, and that is very much not condescending, but has a lot of heart and a lot of honesty in giving room for the people that he meets to speak their minds and to let us know who they are. And I think that's another great thing, great trait about Pasolini as shown through his work, such as this work, Notes for a Film on India. So this is approximately 34 minutes. And then that's not all, because then we have another supplement, which is right here, which is the sequence. It's known in English as the sequence of the paper flower. And the Criterion notes for this say, Pasolini directed this sketch featuring actor Ninetto Davoli as part of the 1969 anthology film Love and Anger, a compendium of modern-day cinematic reflections on the Gospels that also features the work of contemporaries such as Jean-Luc Godard, Bernardo Bertolucci, and Marco Bellocchio. So this sequence is approximately 11 minutes, and it's described as being from 1969. It's a little bit, in terms of, it's around the same time as the release of Oedipus Rex. It does feature Ninetto Davoli in a type of main central role. It is approximately 11 minutes, and it has also this type of cinematic essay, which is combining the currency of modern day Italy, an urban landscape of Italy, with Davoli at the center. Again, the real life streets, and walking and sitting and walking down sidewalks and down streets, which is also juxtaposed very directly with key images of sort of recent history of Italy, both in terms of a type of social political upheaval and military-based history, and that has links to concepts of the modern day, both in terms of progress and evolution, as well as a regressive a possibility of an interpretation that is regressive, and that is looking at it as a step backwards. Again, it depends on one's point of view, and also that type of forwards, backwards, push and pull with Davoli at the center, also is given, I think, life in terms of the color photography, but also death in terms of the historical concerns and the consequences of various aspects of the historical past that are then juxtaposed with the currency of the present, again with Davoli at the center. So we have, again, something that is very much on display in many works by Pasolini, including, one can say, Oedipus Rex. The past and the present. And so the sequence of the paper flower as part of the supplements here included here. It's a fascinating sequence, so please check it out if you can. And then we have the trailer, which rounds out the supplements here for disc 6 regarding Oedipus Rex. So one can say that we don't necessarily have supplements that are directly related to, say, a direct conversation about Oedipus Rex per se. So if you are interested, there have been other supplements in past discs about, say, an overview of Pasolini's life and career. So you might find some, for instance, on the first disc in relation to, say, Acatone and others. So you might be able to find aspects of Pasolini's career and Oedipus Rex in other supplements that we have addressed over the course of this discussion series so far. But on this particular disc 6, we don't have anything that can be said to be directly relevant. We do have works that are very much relevant to the trajectory of Pasolini, and one can say is the approach, the cinematic approach and philosophy of Pasolini. And that cinematic approach and philosophy is very relevant too in the context of Oedipus Rex. So in that way, there's a type of connection. So they aren't wholly unrelated, but at the same time, we don't have, say, a direct, say, making of Oedipus Rex as an example. So it might have been interesting to have something like that. It might have been interesting too to see maybe a new supplement, or I'm sorry, a new commentary track, etc. But we don't get that. We will look to, again, the essay that's included in this booklet a little bit later in this video, but just keep that in mind. While we don't have anything in terms of, say, a direct commentary track or making of per se, we are still getting some very interesting, again, further explorations into the Pasolini perspective, as well as, of course, the great film itself that is Oedipus Rex, again, for purposes of this disc 6. And so let us now turn to other aspects of this. Before we get to the great essay, let me point out that I will be talking in a separate video about the packaging and cover art design for this, but just suffice to note that this will be found in one of the pages here in this hardbound sleeve compartment system that is found here, and it is going to be found on disc number 6, and that brings us to the wonderful booklet and the essay, the James Quandt essay. As I mentioned before, there's a comprehensive essay in this booklet, which we will talk about later in a separate video, but there are also write-ups and critical analytical essays for each of the films. And these aren't plot synopses, but they are critical analysis essays. And so James Quandt provides another brilliant one for Oedipus Rex, again, starting on page 62. This is great. This is a great, it talks about aspects about how Pasolini has described this film, or has it has been noted that Pasolini has been described to have described this film as being very, very personal. And he regards some of the sequences to be among the greatest among some of the greatest things that he has ever made. And I think James Quandt and others, I think, share those sentiments very well. And this notion about how this film could be said to be a very personal film by Pasolini, and I think that's derived by the fact that Pasolini's biography, as mentioned or referenced here by James Quandt in terms of what happened to him and his family during his childhood, growing up in the context of Italy during and after the war, the Second World War, and his relationship and his father and his mother and other members of his family. There are aspects of this that could be said to be, say, handling of themes that are definitely relevant to, say, an understanding of the biography of Pasolini. And James Quandt makes note of that masterfully. And there are also aspects too in terms of the way that this film is shot. I should note that we have a color film here, the use of color photography in the body of work of Pasolini. So we have it here in Oedipus Rex in sort of all of its glory. And part of that glorious color film cinematography also has to do with some of the close-ups here, and close-ups on the actors and aspects of their physical presence. And there's a real honesty and directness in terms of how this is handled. The close-up has been done so masterfully in other past works by Pasolini. The black and white photography works of, say, The Gospel According to Matthew, or Love Meetings, or Mamma Roma, etc., Catone, and here at Hawks and the Sparrows. And here we have the continuation of that, but this time in the context of the glorious color photography, which, again, the wonderful richness of almost the red earth and the dust versus the shadowed walls, almost the blue hues of the shadowed walls, and even the modern day settings. And that contrast is quite brilliant indeed. So this essay, this James Quandt essay, is another brilliant one. I would say that, again, if one has certain, say, points of criticism to make about what one might perceive to be a maybe supplements which might want people, or might have people wanting more in terms of direct making of Oedipus Rex supplements. You get the Oedipus Rex points explained so wonderfully in the James Quandt essay, and that's true also for the other write-ups that he does on the other films. So bravo to James Quandt, as usual, for another brilliant job and a brilliant essay here, again, in the context of Oedipus Rex. My recommendation is to watch Oedipus Rex, and indeed, maybe if possible, watch all of the body of work of Pasolini when you see this, get this set, and then you can read all these great essays, including the one that he's written for Oedipus Rex. It's definitely worth it. So yes, that concludes my brief, say, comments on this great film, Oedipus Rex. Again, it's a very important film. It's said to be, say, in terms of the trajectory of Pasolini's work, in terms of the fact that it's a color film, and the fact also that it's based upon the play of Sophocles, so it could be said to be going in the route of, say, classical literature. Although we have seen elements of Pasolini's work prior to this that can be said to have this idea of film adaptations of text, or adaptations or aspects of classical literature, etc. But this could be said to be another type of adaptation work, but done in the Pasolini style. And so in that way, it could be said to be similar yet distinct from other films that we have seen from Pasolini. And indeed, this is something to keep in mind when we progress further into the latter works of Pasolini, as included, for instance, in this great set, Pasolini 101. So this film marks, I think, an important milestone in that regard. And also, again, in terms of the way it handles a type of social political critique, as well as the handling of, say, Freudian analysis in the context of Sophocles and Oedipus Rex, and also how that has a very direct personal touch and personal relationship that could be said to be very much a revelation into the personal concerns of Pasolini as a filmmaker and as a human being, but also in terms of how this fits into the filmography of Pasolini writ large. This is such an amazing and important work, and I'm so glad it's presented here in the context of Pasolini 101, and that is Oedipus Rex. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including Oedipus Rex, including other films by Pasolini in Pasolini 101 and beyond. So until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.